a strong foundation to make sense, to make an idea, especially as grand as universal fraternity. We need a solid theological foundation for that. We have gotten used to the thought that public discourse needs to be secular. So there's a dichotomy between the private religious on the one hand and the public secular. What we believe as Christians in our faith tradition is relevant for what is happening outside the church. And the other way around, what is happening outside in the public spheres, economics, politics, war, peace, technology, sustainability, actually is relevant for our theological thinking.
The Middle Ages were focused on God. The whole civilization tried to articulate his central place in the society. And then suddenly in the 16th century we pass towards anthropocentrism. So man is the measure of our thinking about our place in the world, about our civilization. And right now we are in the middle of the process which tries to push us a little bit out of this, to some extent, comfort zone and bring us to something which is much more focused on the earth, on our planet, which tries to push us out of our anthropocentric thinking towards something that would become more and more cosmocentric or planetocentric. And obviously this development has its importance for the church, because the church had to, and right now has to, find the way to engage with this changing world. And I think that it took some time to find the right way to address this change to anthropocentrism from theocentrism. In my humble opinion, it was achieved only with the Second Vatican Council, which helped us to understand that this anthropological discussion may become for us a way to engage with the contemporary world and a way to help to bring this contemporary world to Christ, trying to show to this contemporary world that the fullness of humanity may be achieved only in Christ. And I would say that this thought became really the backbone of the pontificate of John Paul II, whose main project was to introduce the Second Vatican Council. And right now, as you understand, we are looking for a way to engage this transition from anthropocentrism to planetocentrism, or cosmocentrism, or something like this. And my understanding is that Pope Francis was trying to propose the idea of universal fraternity, thinking about Saint Francis and his way of thinking about fraternity, which is not limited to humans, as a proposal how to try to do it.
Speaking as a priest and therefore as a Christian and a Catholic, for me universal fraternity is rooted and based on the origins of the human species according to scriptures. In the book of Genesis, Adam calls his wife Eve, and then it adds, because she is the mother of all living beings. Okay, so the Bible makes a point in underlying the unity, the common origin of all beings.
La fratellanza umana è un altro concetto che va in comune con gli altri concetti e aiuta al cristiano e al non cristiano a vivere e a vedere uno nell'altro non un avversario, ma un amico, un fratello nella famiglia umana. Quindi la fratellanza umana ci aiuta a vivere i concetti del Vangelo, perché non possiamo dimenticare che Cristo ha messo la regola d'oro: fate agli altri ciò che volete che facciano voi. E questa è la regola che ci porta a trattare tutti gli esseri umani come fratelli e sorelle. La fratellanza umana è ovviamente presente nella Bibbia, perché se noi crediamo di essere usciti dalle mani di Dio, come ci insegna la Bibbia, quindi siamo tutti fratelli e sorelle perché abbiamo la stessa fonte. Il credere nel Creatore ci porta a credere nell'essere sue creature, suoi figli, come Gesù ci insegna. Nella sua enciclica Fratelli Tutti il Papa utilizza questa pagina stupenda del Vangelo del Buon Samaritano come l'esempio concreto, perché il Buon Samaritano che arriva a vedere una persona, un essere umano in bisogno, e non guarda che questa persona fa parte dei Samaritani, degli ebrei, non guarda questo, guarda che è un essere umano in bisogno, quindi lascia il suo viaggio, lascia tutto ciò che aveva programmato e corre ad aiutare questa persona nel bisogno. E certamente la parola fratelli è presente sempre in tutta la storia. San Francesco, per esempio, ha creato la prima comunità di fratelli, dove tutti si chiamavano fratelli, e ha sviluppato questa spiritualità quando ha chiamato il sole, la luna, la morte, sorella. Quindi è un'idea ovviamente presente in tutta la tradizione della Chiesa, di padre, dove rispecchia la fede espressa chiaramente nella Bibbia.
If we talking about universal brotherhood or sisterhood or whatever, then it just means that there's a commonality or something that binds us together, which is related in our common origin. The Greek word for a brother and a sister it uses a word which also applies to a dolphin. But the word that applies to a dolphin, which also applies to the womb, is the same expression. So adelphos means from the womb, okay? And a brother is adelphos, a sister is adelphe. That's a feminine, okay? So it presents brothers and sisters as exiting, coming out of the same womb. So the issue is, can two people come out of the same womb and be different in dignities? It's not possible. Coming from the same womb and sharing the same nature, one cannot have more dignity than the other. So in that sense, the universal brotherhood related in the unity of the origins also explains or justifies the conversation about the common dignity of all people. This common origin is affirmed in several religious literatures, and I think that is their way of affirming also the fact that human beings are a brotherhood or a sisterhood that derives from a common origin.
Fraternity is universalistic. Universalistic means that the link of fraternity does not depend on our belonging to a particular group or to a particular ethnical group, etc., etc. The fraternity presupposes that all human beings are tendentially, as Genovese used to say, friends among themselves by nature.
Fraternity and friendship are very closely related. There's a note of difference because fraternity, I think, places the emphasis on an attitude of benevolence. Right? I view the other in a benevolent way, and I undertake actions that are manifest, that benevolence. Friendship places the accent on a stable condition of reciprocity. So friendship has this character of being a kind of state that one's in. So we talk about a friendship, which means that you've got a kind of relationship that's enduring over time. Friendship has the advantage over fraternity that it's not a gendered term, okay? Because we know fraternity comes from frater, the word brother. Some people react to that. Okay?
The paradox about universal fraternity is that fraternities cannot be enough universal because for some people, in particular female, women, feminist sensibility, fraternity refers only to men, to brothers, and then it's not enough inclusive. What I think, I like the expression because we are not invented it. There is a robust tradition about fraternity in social sciences, in a liberal tradition. Think about John Rawls, that uses fraternity as one of the founding principles of his theory of justice. There are also the French Revolution, now recently Pope Francis encyclical letter Fratelli Tutti. Fraternity overlaps with other concepts that are like social friendship, reciprocity, relational goods, solidarity, community. But in defining it, we have to be aware of this complexity about semantics, because words are important in life. In particular, here, in particular in the Catholic Church, where there is a huge issue about women, and then you cannot avoid the issue because language embodies power structures, embodies violence, embodies injustice, inequality of gender. Then if we use one word with this strong connotation, we must explain, but once explained, we can continue to use it because I think it's also a beautiful expression, a beautiful name.
Le mot lui-même de fraternité pose un problème. Alors, on n'en a pas vraiment d'autres dans nos langues latines. Donc, on doit bien s'accommoder du mot fraternité. Donc, on a un mot pour les hommes, un mot pour les femmes. Mais il nous manque un mot pour dire cette relation fraternelle des hommes et des femmes, et un mot qui ne soit pas genré. Et justement, pour atteindre cette idée de l'universalité, eh bien, il y a un travail à faire même sur le vocabulaire, parce que même le vocabulaire est piégé. Alors, bien sûr, moi, quand j'emploie le mot fraternité, c'est faute de mieux dans le langage que je connais, mais bien sûr, ça concerne les hommes et les femmes.
People have argued about terminology for centuries, of course, and I think instead of trying to find the just perfect term, we should rather think about the substance behind it. And you can call it friendship, you can call it, what was this? Siblinghood or things like that. We all got it. It's about treating and recognizing our fellow human beings as part of the same family. That's it.
What about solidarity? It's a word which was introduced into even common language and political language by socialist movement. Before did not exist. What is typical of Christianity is fraternity, because fraternity we find it in the gospel itself already a long time ago. So solidarity presupposes that people participate because they share a common attitude. For instance, the typical example is the labor class. So the members of the labor class they maintain solidarity relations among themselves, but not vis-à-vis the other ones. For instance, if you consider the class struggle, capital versus labor, this is a typical example. So that does not mean that solidarity is not important. It's very important, but it should not be confused with fraternity. Keeping in mind that a fraternal society is also a solidary society. The vice versa is not true. In other words, you can have the case, and historical case, the historians told us, of societies which were based on solidarity groups, but they sooner or later transform themselves into battles of different.
Solidarity is a much lighter version, and even friendship is a much lighter version of fraternity, because friendship is something that you select, and even solidarity because you select to support somebody, and not someone else. But instead, fraternity, first of all, is a much broader concept, and is something that you do not select because you are born inside humanity, which is made by people who have a common destiny. And precisely this, in my view, is the distinctive feature of fraternity, namely to have a common destiny, to understand that we have a common destiny. To have a common destiny does not really mean that you share all views, and even that you do not share the kind of God that someone else will worship. But common destiny means that you are not here simply to be a consumer, no, and to live the present, but you aim to something that is not present, but you want to reach.
We understand, especially if we put our emphasis on universal, that it is something really eschatological. It is not up to us to bring us to this point, that we cannot achieve it with our own forces, that it may be only received as a gift of God. If you look at some attempts to articulate the universal dimension of fraternity, you can find them in our recent history. So communism was such an attempt to articulate fraternity in this eschatological way, and we understand why it was so risky, because at some point when we start to imagine that we can introduce it on our own, with our own forces, that it is not a gift given by God, we are not patient and so on, we can start to be cruel. We should be humble. We should recognize that it's not up to us to get to the point of universal fraternity, and we really should stick to the Bible. And what does it mean to stick to the Bible? The reflection of the Bible on fraternity is very down to earth. It's very down to earth. The Bible starts with the stories of two brothers. And the book of Genesis discusses the stories of two brothers in a very deep, profound way. And at the end of this book, we get a prophetic sign in the blessing of Ephraim and Manasseh, who puts his hand, inversely on the heads of Ephraim and Manasseh, in such a way that we can see the cross, and in the end it's the cross of Christ which is the answer to the hostility, to the enmity of brothers, and on the cross of Christ the quarrels of brothers start to be reconciled. But as we understand, this reconciliation has its price. It's its price, and I'm not sure that we are so eager, so open to paying this price.